Do you enjoy the harvest of Missouri through food, fuel, or fiber? Interested in strengthening your community or making a difference in the lives of others? You're in the right place. This is Stand for Ag with Missouri Farmers Care. Join us for thoughtful conversations around the intersections of farmer, rancher, and consumer interests. Grab a seat, press play, and join the conversation.
You'll see that we all share a lot of passion for this industry, because sometimes that's what you need to rely on, is the passion that you have for the industry and for what we do that keeps us going on a daily basis. So rather than me speak, you've heard my story and my farm story in my introduction. I called a panel of respected colleagues in agriculture that have diverse perspectives to share. One of them being your classmate, Kaitlin Flick, and then Kate Lambert. So Kate, do you want to just kind of give us, introduce yourself and give a little more fleshed out idea of who you are and what your farm and professional roles in agriculture look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me. Like Ashley said, we really appreciate the opportunity to talk about things that we enjoy, and our passion is probably a good way to say it. I've had the opportunity to work with this group for a lot of years, and always mind blown at the quality of candidate that comes through, and the diversity and where you guys come from and the things you bring to the table. So appreciate the opportunity to get to visit with you. My husband and I farm over in the north central part of the state, about an hour by way of highway, a very nauseating ride to get that direction. Over by Chillicothe, right on Highway 36, basically right in the middle of the state in the north part. So we're 99 miles from Hannibal and 99 miles from St. Joe. We have got a diversified operation, so we've got row crop, corn, soybeans. We don't do a whole lot of wheat anymore, and we still do some hay, which right now we're questioning why we do that. We have got beef cattle, similar to what you would have seen here with a mama cow operation. And then we have got a commercial flock of sheep as well. And then we started 3 years ago. We'll be going into our 4th year in the fall. For 2 months out of the year, we open the farm up for some tourism, and we do a pumpkin patch and a corn maze. And then in addition to that, my husband is on the farm full time. I have a career off the farm full time. I work for FCS Financial. We are an ag lending cooperative. We're a farm credit lender, if you've ever heard the term farm credit. So as Ashley alluded to earlier, the cooperative principle in agriculture is very strong. You're going to hear some more references to that. We are a cooperative, which means our customers are our owners. So everybody who borrows money from us also owns stock in the cooperative. Those are the only people who own stock in the cooperative. And we serve farmers and ranchers here in the state of Missouri. We cover most of the state, 102 counties. We do not cover the Boot Heel. That's covered by a sister organization down there. In my role with them, I'm Director of Education and Engagement. So I get to go around the state, prior to COVID, I got to go around the state doing events, customer events, education. One of my favorite things that I get to do is our educational work with young beginning farmers, where we teach them, we go through different courses to look at the business and finance and risk mitigation sides of farming. So we don't talk to them about production. There's other people that do that. But we talk to them really about the business side, and I love getting to help that group. And then more recently, we've started a concentrated effort towards women. That kind of got changed with COVID for what it was supposed to look like, but we are going to kick that off with the first in-person event this coming November. And as we see demographics in agriculture shift and we start to see the decision makers on the farm looking a little different than they did 10, 20, 30 years ago, I am really excited to get to talk to that group of women and get to bring content to them as well. So that is a kind of a high-level overview of what the farm looks like and what my day-to-day career looks like.
As a quick side note, women own a lot of farmland in Missouri and in the United States. So women outlive men. Often there are a lot of widowed women that are a major percentage of landowners. Now, they may or may not be on the farm decision makers. There's both. And there's a lot of rented ground, like the individual I mentioned earlier that was a widow that we rented a farm from. So that's just an interesting side note to seg from Kate's to another cooperative and another element of our, you'll hear us all talk about I thought about doing a panel one year that is all of the careers, technology, and other entities that make our farms successful. there is a whole ecosystem, career ecosystem around these farms. Our veterinarian is an easy one. Our farrier is very important here, but there are many others. And so Kaitlin's an integral part of that and works with producers. So can you?
Yep, so my name is Kaitlin Flick, and I'm an agronomist. And if you guys don't know what that is, basically I work with farmers on corn, soybeans, wheat, some like native grasses, and I do recommendations on like fertilizer, herbicide, insecticides, fungicides, looking at plant diseases, plant health. Just my overall goal is to make sure they can produce the best crop and the healthiest crop that's going to yield the most, because if they win, then I win. And so I work for MFA Inc. It is an ag retailer. They're all over the state of Missouri. If you drive through a small town, you see a grain elevator and a sign with a shield that says MFA. I mean, they're all over. We are also located in a few in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Iowa. So we're kind of all spread out over the state. And that's what I do professionally, so that's like my 9 to 5. But in agriculture and being an agronomist, my phone rang at 6:30 this morning with the first question, so it's really like 6 to 10. But I love it. Off of my professional job, I grew up in a family farm. I'm kind of a transplant. I'm from different parts of the state of Missouri and have connections everywhere. So I currently live in Boonville because I cover a central Missouri area for my agronomist duties. But my family farms over in the St. Charles County area in Augusta, Missouri. My family dairy farms over there and they row crop. And then I have a small cattle herd with me in Cooper County that I take care of and manage. And then I also have a big garden that I sell to a couple local restaurants in the Kansas City area. And that's been a new endeavor this summer, and I've loved every moment of that. So like Kate mentioned, it's fun to have different niche markets to play into and different things to do, that diversity.
Is this your first year for your garden?
It is. Well, it was my first year selling.
Yes. We will love to hear by the end of this class just what that has been like for the year. Yes. I think that's wonderful. And Kate, did you grow up, did you say this? Are you originally from?
I didn't cover that. So I did not grow up on a farm. I grew up about 60 miles west of Chicago in northern Illinois. My husband is a 6th generation farmer. So when I moved down here, we met. My dad thought it was important that we have an understanding of agriculture, so he encouraged us to be an FFA. And through that, I ended up a very small sheep project on a widow's farm outside of town who let us use her barn. And ended up meeting my husband in Laramie, Wyoming, and then following him down here. And so that was a culture shock. It was a lifestyle shock. I'm still adapting. We've been married for 12 years now. And it is just something that when you're not born and raised in it, it's a very different lifestyle with a lot of adjustment. And a lot of people go through that. It just is different than the way that I grew up, and still learning what that's like.
Yeah, Kate's done a great job. She has, they've distinguished themselves, not just she, they are very much a unit. Matt and Kate and Farm were our inaugural Leopold Conservation Award recipients. So the very first year that we came together as an agricultural organization to highlight the best of private working land stewardship, that clean air, clean water, abundant wildlife come from our working farms, right? Not a numbers person, guys. 90+% of land in Missouri is privately owned.
96%.
96%, there we go, is privately owned. And so it's incumbent upon us. Clearly, we live on the land, we love the land, we're very engaged with the land, but then there are those that go above and beyond. And so we recognize Kate and Matt as the first Leopold recipients because they're doing a tremendous job and setting the bar and conversation and leadership and communication in a way that is inspiring others to try new things, to take new approaches. We are always innovating in agriculture. I think we've got some Bayer staff here, right? And that is mind-blowing, cutting-edge innovation in agriculture. So we're then trying to translate that and implement that on the farm and push the envelope differently on how we can maximize soil health and productivity and fertility and production at the same time so that we're feeding that growing world. I'll touch a little bit on what I do professionally. I really appreciated this banner this morning as it's covering up the messiest part of the shop, and so I strategically placed that there. Missouri Farmers Care is a coalition of all the agriculture groups in the state. I touched on some of those. It is every major commodity group. There are 45 organizations that represent farmers and ranchers. So farmers and ranchers aren't my members, but they're the members of MFA and FCS Financial and the cattlemen of the state and many others. And we have come together with an umbrella organization that has a diverse set of programs that really, I think, represent the heart of Missouri agriculture and come together to speak to consumers, to each other, and to educate in a way that individually none of those organizations could do on their own. And so I spend my time overseeing a team of contractors from around the state that work on ag education at an elementary level, for instance. So it's great to be connected to where your food is grown and how it's grown and who is growing it. And we go in and try to go into schools and open the barn doors so that people can connect with what agriculture looks like today. So we have thousands of Missouri 3rd and 4th graders that are in ag education on the move across the state. We reach out in summer school this year. We have our largest summer school ever. We'll be in all of North KC schools, for instance, all of Columbia Public Schools for summer school, with a fundamental understanding of conservation, stewardship, pork, corn, soy, cattle, nutrition, soil science, and connect that back with state standards and curriculum so that all of that context is brought in. Our goal is also to open eyes in careers in agriculture. We can talk about careers in agriculture in a little bit. I think that maybe we've been struggling with filling some career opportunities, maybe even before the COVID upheaval, that there's been a lot of demand for careers in ag. From hardworking jobs to agronomists and PhDs, there are headhunters.
Plant pathologists.
Plant pathologists, chemists.
Technology.
Yes. And so so that's one of our programs. We do a drive to feed kids. So last year we raised resources or provided meat for 1 million meals for Missouri's families that are food insecure. That is 1 in 5 Missouri families, not an urban or a rural issue, as prevalent in rural communities as it is in urban communities. So all of our organizations work very hard to produce abundance, right? And we do. American agriculture does a tremendous job producing abundance from our farm fields. That does not mean that that distribution is equivalent, right? And reaches everybody's dinner table. It's pretty hard to succeed when your tummy's rumbling and you can't really focus. And I think any of us who have been parents or have been in schools see that reality really clearly. And so we've just felt called to stand in that gap. And last year there was processing there was a slowdown in meat processing. We took the opportunity to connect with some local producers, provided 318,000 servings of pork that was Missouri pork to Missouri families. So we're really proud of that program that is in the middle of our drive this summer. Bayer is a huge partner in that. They're a presenting sponsor of that, thanks to your leadership and Brett Begeman, who has a heart for Missouri children as well. So we are appreciative of that. There are many other partners, FCS Financial and MFA being among those that really are making that program happen. We also partner with communities and counties at a local level through Agri-Ready County designation. So our goal is to promote agriculture, to promote what we have and bring new assets, including ag education, to our communities that are open for agricultural opportunity and entrepreneurship. We've seen a lot of success with this program. 64 of Missouri's 114 counties are Agri-Ready designated so that we're able to partner on a local level. Those county commissioners make a lot of difference in the community's, the policy environment in a community. And Kate and I live in those counties that perhaps aren't open as much to growth and development. And Kaitlin can tell a very complex story in Cooper County that there have been a lot of discussions down there. We also work on an outreach program with the St. Louis Cardinals. You may have seen Missouri Farmers Care and our very large mascots, if you're a baseball fan, under normal years, do a race in the 3rd inning that is just highlighting, again, bringing farms and farm families into the stadium and getting that attention. And then our additional program, Alex, is?
Sorry, I'm back here with the technology. So Stand for Ag podcast is a huge outreach portion of what Missouri Farmers Care does. It was started last year. Now I am the host, so it is my child. This is actually being recorded for an episode. but it highlights insightful and intentional conversations in ag. So we had a conversation with Keith Dieschold, which is the Missouri FFA State Executive Secretary, and also a partner with the Food and Security Day, where this year 910 FFA members will come together to pack 150,000 meals for food banks through Feeding Missouri. And then also people that have episodes slated that I don't know will get recorded, so I can't really promise those being there, but it's all on the podcast. Check it out. It's called Stand for Ag, and we would love for you to join the conversation.
And in addition to Stand for Ag, I've already talked about our Leopold Conservation Award program. So we have 2 recipients. Our last year recipient was Addie and Jocelyn Yoder, and you'll hear more about that and see their story in action. So that is my professional life. I do that headquartered right here and travel about the state on a normal time frame, overseeing those contractors and those programs. And then I haven't really, so then you've seen my on-farm job in addition to the boys that have been here today. Okay, so making lunch is somewhere on its way. So we'll take a break somewhere in the middle of this conversation. But doing a little transition, we want to get to just conversation with you guys. We have some hot topics we want to hit. But just as a quick, has there been a challenge or opportunity? You can take either side of this coin. Has there been a challenge or opportunity in ag in the last year or two that stands out to you, Kate?
Yeah, I mean, a whole bunch of them, right? It's no different than what all of you have went through. We all, March of last year, our worlds got flipped upside down. So there's absolutely been an opportunity that has come out of that. Personally, you guys know with some of the things that happened in the meat supply chain, we have had more interest in people asking about direct off-farm sales for us. That is kind of a catch-22 because it's not as profitable as people think, and it's not quite as easy as taking my calves to the sale barn and selling them that way. But it is something that I personally get kind of excited about, and so that has been a neat opportunity. But honestly, my favorite opportunity that has come out of it is something that the trend line was already started in that direction, and COVID really kind of heightened it, and that is people paying attention to agriculture and wanting to know where their food comes from and wanting to ask questions. And sometimes we can joke in the industry, and we're probably not as good as we should be about being open to those conversations, but the reality is that is a really exciting opportunity for us. When you look at about 1.5% of the population is involved in production agriculture, most of us no longer have a family member that is involved. Most of us, grandpa is no longer involved in farming, right? So all of a sudden when we have people asking questions and wanting to know what's going on in our world, that's exciting for us. We have a really cool story to tell. We have a lot of voices that are trying to put misinformation out there. So people actually turning in and saying, hang on a minute, I want to talk to somebody about this. That has been a cool opportunity that we've tried to capitalize on as much as we can to have those conversations. And that is not, a lot of people think, well, that's Kate and Matt in rural Missouri talking to somebody in St. Louis or Chicago or Washington, D.C. That is just as much me needing to talk to people in Brookfield, our rural town of 4,500 people. They have just as many questions, and they're bombarded with just as much misinformation as what people across the country are. So their local conversations, their social media conversations, their state and national conversations with consumers and legislators, that's been really fun and a good opportunity for the industry as a whole.
Kate is getting ready to have a drive-through meat sale, meat
are.
market, which I think is innovative and kind of fun.
So yeah, we're doing a drive-through meat sale, and I've got to position this correctly because our entire county population is about 10,000 people. So we are very rural. We also live in an area that has got a lot of people, almost everybody, that is functioning on a budget, right? So if I look to models of people who live in outskirt urban areas or suburban areas and what they're able to do with direct sales, for instance, I have got a friend in the Kansas City area who can very easily sell out of $8 a pound ground beef, just like that. It's not a problem. People will not even blink an eye at paying $8 a pound for ground beef. That's not feasible in my market. I have to be competitive with Walmart. And so that is a whole different, I have to be competitive with Walmart. And my beef is in Walmart too, so I was trying to clarify that. Like I'm not dogging grocery store beef because that's where most of my beef is. So please continue to buy beef at the grocery store. But for that small portion that we're going to sell direct, we have to be competitive with the grocery stores because that's what my consumers can afford. And then we also have to have enough people, right? So I've only got 10,000 people. It's a very small percentage of those people that are willing to drive out to the farm. So we've been able to successfully do that with the pumpkin patch. When the pumpkin patch is open, people are already there for entertainment purposes. They're like, hey, I'd like to buy $50 or $100 or $150 worth of meat. And that's worked fantastic. I have a little bit more of a corner on the market on lamb. There is, to my knowledge, nowhere else in Linn County, Missouri that you can get lamb. And so we've actually, that has been received extremely well, and we've done great with that. But when the pumpkin patch closed down, we weren't sure. How are we going to make this happen? So in 2 weeks, we are trying a drive-through meat sale where people can come in. We've got a couple folks that will help us take the order, pull up. We'll use our Square card readers and hopefully get everything packaged up and people pull in and pull out without having to get out of their vehicle, and we're going to give it a shot. I don't know. It may be a bust, and it might work really well. So we'll just give it a shot.
And I'll just piggyback on that. On the crop side of things, I think like when Kate mentioned consumer-based marketing, it's a hot topic, and COVID really opened everyone's eyes and made people start asking questions. And I just, as an agronomist, like that's conversations I love to have with people too about how corn is grown, soybeans, wheat, and what the growers I work with, what they're doing to make sure you have healthy crops and you have nutritious food, and the practices they're implementing, right? Like soil health and environmentally friendly practices. So we have good, clean water, but we're also taking care of our crops and having high yields.
So as a real quick side note, what does your day look like, Kaitlin? What does being an agronomist actually look like?
Sure, so it always depends by the season too. And a typical day in the summertime, So I'm an agronomist and I cover a big territory, and I have a lot of crop consultants, crop scouts that report to me. So my focus is always to make sure their questions are being met, and if they have questions in the field like what's this bug, what's this disease, what is the solution I need to provide to the farmer, I'm training and developing them so they can become great agronomists and they can continue their career. I also do like complaint calls if there is a problem where a grower sprayed twice the rate of a herbicide on accident on just a small acre, and he wants to know, is this going to hurt my plant? Is it going to kill my corn crop? Do I need to replant? Do I need to do something else? I handle those. I work with farmers on chemical plans. I work with farmers on nutrient management plans, and those are programs where we talk about what fertilizer is going on the field in the next 4 years, and to check their nitrogen and phosphorus levels to make sure that they stay in check, to make sure that the crop is getting the nitrogen and phosphorus it needs, but that we're not over applying. Because if we over apply, the crop's not going to use it, and the farmer is going to lose money, and that's not environmentally friendly either, and we don't want to do that. The environment is our number one priority. We drink the water just like you guys, and we all want to take care of it. So those are some of the things I focus on this time of year.
I would say for our organization, the challenge that COVID presented was we have an in-classroom education program where passionate educators from around the state go into schools. Clearly, that was a challenge. We pivoted to a at-home activity pack that students could do online, a little bit of hybrid. It is not the same, but we reached audiences we would have never, and perhaps because of the spike in interest and engagement that we were all driven to have thanks to having kids at home. And that has then continues to build and catapulting into success this summer. So that is good as well.
Side note, pivoted is a word that I hope to never use again when this is finally over with. Yeah, maybe in that is fine, but I'm tired of pivoting.
Agreed. I would like to stop pivoting, drive a straight line. Okay, does anybody have any burning questions? We're going to hit some hot topics in ag that really irritate us or make us think, or we wish consumers knew better. Does anybody have anything burning before we hit any of those topics?
I have one. So you mentioned the work that you did because of COVID and how you were reaching students. Is there anything that you would keep?
Yes.
Because of COVID, something that you had to do, and now you're like, this actually turned out great because you said you reached for.
Absolutely. We are doing, there are some schools that say we're not comfortable having a guest presenter come in. However, they're really comfortable with our curriculum. It aligns with state standards. And so we have found a way to get those class in-hand activities into classrooms and then reach in virtually, which now kids are very much used to, even facilitated in the classroom. In addition to summer school, in addition to, there is so much more reach and so much more potential, particularly our city schools have been the hardest to get into. Not Kansas City, St. Louis has been a real challenge to break into schools. I see so much more potential happening because we've had to innovate, and that's a great thing. Now, it does involve, we're a bunch of independent contractors, it does involve, one of my colleagues has a shop like this that has been taken over by activity packs that her husband probably would like to get out of the shop, but it has created new opportunities, so that's good. Okay, I'm on this panel every year that's agriculture, water, and environment, and we do a top 10 list, and if someone has it on their top 10 list, we just strike and move through. So we all just randomly picked 10 or so things, and we're gonna go through, hit on it. We would love to have our panelists address any thoughts we have about that, and then we want to hear from you guys if you have anything to say on any of these topics. So please feel free to weigh in. Kate, you already are up and ready to go. You're the first one.
These are in no particular order, but one thing, the first one that I wrote down is that, and you probably got the hint of this, is that farming is not simple. And I'm not going to bring up old comments that have been made, but that was something that was really mind-blowing for me when I moved from suburban life to the farm. The complexity of it, the number of people, the number of experts and professionals that are involved to make the farm work is simply mind-blowing. And you guys are all familiar with this type of structure, we just don't equate it to the farm. Think of your farmers as a CEO type role, and they have got an executive team, they have got a board of advisors, they have got all these other people that they constantly have to tap into. And so if I will just look at that in terms of our personal operation, and I think about the things that we have to manage on a day-to-day basis. We got up, and I'll give yesterday as an example. So yesterday, right now, we are in the middle of replanting corn, planting soybeans, hay that got knocked down. So my husband has got to monitor where trucks are at, where seed is at. We've got to know what the weather is going to be, not only for conditions for planting, but hay needs a little bit different and a little bit different type of forecast than what we prefer. So we have to watch it with that. We have got to know where all of our inputs are. What type of chemical do we need coming in? When are we going to need it? Where is it at? COVID has changed some of that type of thing that we always just thought we can run into town and get it. Just like you guys, all of a sudden we may have to change some of those things. So there's that, there's the weather. There is agronomy issues that we have to be constantly watching. There is the business side of it that we have to worry about, the accounting side of it, the legal side of it. We have to worry about our employees. Where is Chuck at, and what is he doing, and where do we need him to be, and what when does he need time off? Just like all of those things that you guys have to think about in your day-to-day jobs. And then you throw the cattle into that. So a couple days ago, my husband was in the field planting. We were way behind on that. So it's like that tractor cannot get shut down for anything. At the same time, the gentleman who had cut hay, or who had mowed hay for us and was supposed to be baling and moving bales out, had equipment breakdown. And so we had to find a way to get in and help get that done. And at the same time, I got a Facebook message from a neighbor who drove by, and we had cows out. And so somebody had to run, and I was like, hey, no problem, I can run and go get the cows back in. And then I get down there and find out that one of the bulls, who is not our favorite bull, is also out with that group of cows. So then it's like, okay, all hands off deck, father-in-law and husband and help have to all come and help get that pen of cows in, because Kate is not getting in there with that bull herself. So there is, it is this constantly changing thing, and it is a very fast-paced environment. That is something that blew my mind about it. And the number of people, resources, and information, these things, just like you guys, these things have made our world totally different. And the way that we tap into our resources, we might text a picture to our agronomist instead of having to have them come and look at things. So that has changed, but internet is not very reliable. But that is something that is just, I wish more people understood the complexity of it, and how much information and how much task management and how much reliance on other expertise we depend on for all sorts of those things. So most people go into production agriculture because they like to grow things. And so all of those other things, most people didn't want to be meteorologists and weather people. They didn't want to be accountants. They didn't want to be attorneys or finance people. And so oftentimes we have to tap into other experts to help us in those areas.
It's a really good point. Also, we're really good at production, right?
We're really good at that,
We're
yes.
really good at production. We're not often very good at telling our story, which is why we're so thrilled when these groups come, because we are so focused on the farm. Especially, you know, Kate and Matt, I wish Matt was here. Matt is very focused on the farm, and Kate is very outgoing and very forward-facing. So she's talked her husband into a pumpkin patch, something I don't think I could ever pull off, and for 2 months a year. And so we are so good at at doing production, less good at telling our story, which is why you often see organizations and associations to make sure we bring that story forward.
So do you like living on a farm? And, it's so different.
Yeah, totally different. So I love it. And now I literally could not, and like that's just life, right? Like we all just kind of take what we're given and we say, I can't see myself anywhere else. The biggest thing for me is I cannot imagine raising boys anywhere else. And now sometimes like when I go home and I can get a cup of coffee at the coffee shop and me and my sister-in-law can walk down the street to the playground and our kids can play. And you have that like back to suburban access. I'm like, this is really cool. You know, you can run right down the store and buy a pair of jeans if you needed them. So there's some of that because I grew up in that way. I'm like, oh, sometimes I miss these things. And I want my boys, I'm very intentional about my boys being exposed to urban life. And so we will go and we'll take off when Matt's in the tractor and we'll go spend a weekend in St. Louis or to Chicago, because I don't want my boys scared of other places or to think that this is the only place that they can live. And I want them, I don't want to continue or exasperate that rural-urban divide, in my household at least. But now I can't imagine any different. Now, my first son was born in May. We got home from the hospital and my husband put on his boots and started to walk out the door. And I said, where are you going? Because I had this really romantic idea of what the first couple weeks at home was going to look like. And he said, I have to get back to the tractor. And I'm like, oh, you know, it's like this crushing moment. And I mean, that anybody, whether you grew up on a farm or not, I would argue that those bringing that child home is probably a challenge. So there's been nights that I've, you know, cried myself to sleep, or nights that I'm like, I cannot do this anymore. This is crazy. But as the years go on, those get further and further between. And honestly, it builds a grit and a toughness and an independence. There's things I do all the time that my mom would have, and I'm not dogging on you, Mom, because she will listen to this. Not dogging on her at all, but my dad would have taken care of those things, right? And that I'm just like, okay, I have to figure this out. I remember one night trying to fix the garbage disposal, and I YouTubed a video, and I poured a glass of wine, and I'm like, I've got this. I'm going to fix this garbage disposal because I cannot wait for him to get home. And, you know, so there's just, I didn't fix the garbage disposal. I ended up flipping the switch, and it came back on, and it was fine, which was probably a better solution for everybody. I did fix, right? Like, I don't know what I did, but luckily I didn't have to use any of the tools I had set out. But there's that type of grit that when I first came to Missouri and I started meeting women who were born and raised on farms, and like my mother-in-law and my grandmother-in-law, I'm like, oh my goodness, like, I'm not tough enough for that. Like, how are these, you know, like, I can't make it here. Like, I'm not tough enough for that. I can't do the things that they do. And, you know, 5 or 6 or 7 years into it, you start to say, okay, it's going to make me tough enough. That's how this is going to happen.
So one of the challenges or misconceptions I would like to share is, so livestock production, that they are significantly the reason for greenhouse gases. And I just wanted to share about, like, within agriculture, you know, the livestock produces about 3 to 5% of the greenhouse gases, but when you look at transportation, that's about 30%, and electricity generation, that's almost 40%. So I know in agriculture we get a bad reputation a lot for not sometimes from environmentalist groups about, you know, the way that we produce our products, and to make sure that we are always in check with the environment, and we are. And when you look at a broad scale of things, we are constantly making sure that we are using the inputs we need, and we're putting them where we need them, and we're not over applying. And same with our livestock. You know, we're making sure that they're taken care of, and that we're growing them healthy and ethically, and we're not overproducing.
Yes, that was on my list as well. It's really hard to sit out here in my green field that functions as a solar panel and continue to hear how we are responsible for whatever has been cast by extremists, right, for that time. It's really hard to hear that meat is is ruining the environment. When you saw this hill does not need to be in row crop production, right? It doesn't even need to be in tomato production. It needs to be in grass. And so the way to utilize that grass, the way that nature utilized that grass was buffalo, right? And so these cattle are very much like that and utilize the inputs in their natural environment that they were made for. That was probably my top one too. It's hard. We're also continually improving. This is back to numbers. We are using, like, on average, 30% less inputs for all the crops that we are growing. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, any sort of seed, chemical, water. We have engineered them using technology that makes sure that we are continually advancing, pushing the envelope on what we're doing. So that was one as well.
And I would also piggyback, we're doing that with plant science technology, but also information technology. When in the tractor with some of the growers I work with, when we put on fertilizer, we're taking soil samples to see what area needs this amount of fertilizer and what area needs this amount. So if it needs 50 pounds here, but only 10 pounds here, we're not blanket applying 50 pounds. We're doing 5, 10, 30 here, whatever it's needed. And so there's just a lot of different opportunities, even career-wise, to help develop that software. But my growers are working really diligently on their inputs and watching them, because that's how you make your business more profitable too, right?
You'd be happy to know that my son, who's studying accountancy, the professor walked through those numbers about how agriculture is not responsible. So we had a whole session for that. So that was really cool to hear you guys say that, but the students are being taught that.
Yes.
From the industry, we've sat back and we have watched people first villainize beef or meat, lamb, whatever. First they use animal welfare, and then they use, all of a sudden now we're seeing that shift to environment. So there is a group of people who want to see meat consumption gone, and they will use whatever the trending topic is at the time to target that industry. And like Ashley said, when we sit out and we look at our farms, our cattle on our operation are so integral to the total health of that. So we graze, like where we grow corn and soybeans, and then we grow cover crop and we graze that like the buffalo would have done. Cattle in this part, allowing the land to be used the way that it was intended to be used. If it's a hill and it needs to be in grass, cattle allow us to capitalize on that. The idea that all of a sudden you're going to take all of these livestock away and grow avocados on that ground is just not realistic. It is not feasible, and it's extremely frustrating for those of us out in the field who sit back and we say this, these things just don't work and this doesn't make any sense. But on social media, it'll be the trending thing. And I think one of the drivers behind that is people care, and that's awesome. They care about the environment, and so do we. And they want something they can do, right? And we feel like, okay, we can't have an impact on transportation, or we can't make an impact this way. Well, one thing I can do is maybe I don't eat a burger on Monday. So that's an easy checklist box, and people then feel like, okay, I've done something to make a difference. But the reality is it hasn't made a difference, and it's moving in the wrong direction, which is why it's really frustrating for us, because we're like, no, these systems are really important, and it actually turns out animals are part of nature, and they're really important that they stay out here. So
I wish we could flip that self-assessment on its head and think, do I need this cheap, probably under market value plastic item that has been shipped around the world from China using fossil fuels versus that local natural product? I just wish that self-assessment was as easy when we got to the box store, right? Or Amazon, or wherever those things are coming from these days. That's a good one. My probably first one was, I think that you can get more people in agriculture riled up very quickly when talking about fear-based marketing tactics. So it's a great, we're a big tent in agriculture. We support all sorts of production. It's when others start aiming we aim at each other, that I think most people in agriculture start to get really upset, to say my grass-based beef is the only way to eat beef because it's higher in omega-3s, or whatever it may be, or organic is the only way to eat your vegetables, or non-GMO project. I mean, you can go on and on and on, and many of those are margin-based, profit-driven marketing tactics. And it's frustrating to us because really those of us in the food supply chain have trust in our United States food supply chain and know that it's wholesome and it's nutritious and it's safe. And it's when consumers feel the need to spend more, and there are people making hard choices in their family budgets to provide only, I don't care what label you put, only organic or only natural, when they're maybe sacrificing in other areas of their life because they've been scared into it. They feel boxed into a corner that if they don't, they're not making the best choices for their children, their family, themselves. And that is so frustrating to those of us who know the difference and know that, for instance, there are chemicals used in organic production as well. Or the amount of chemicals that we put on an acre of my neighbor's soybean might be less than a coffee cup that are put on very early in the production process, right? Have no bearing in the final product, or whatever it may be. That fear-based marketing, I see lots of farmers on social media say, every time I pick up a product and it has that non-GMO product label, I set it back down, which is getting harder and harder in the grocery store. There are, 5 or 7 GMO-based foods in this country. There's like a lemonade or something that has a non-GMO. Yeah, I can't list them all right now, but it's your primary commodities. And so there's a lot of fear-based marketing that goes into labeling that is very frustrating.
And I would just like to add on with that, even in the organic market and the conventional non-GMO or GMO market, pesticides are used either way. They have to control weeds and insects. Some of the formulations that you might use in conventional, you can still use. It's just a different formulation of the same product, but it's in the organic market. It's just an interesting concept. It's still used.
That conversation was one of the biggest reasons we struggled to sell direct to consumer, because I did not want somebody to come to my farm and say, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have safe beef or better beef or healthier beef, because it's none of those things. It is exactly the same. So we have about 80 mama cows, and we will have, on a good year, 80 baby calves. And 78 of those calves will go to the grocery store. And 2 of them will end up in my freezer to sell direct. In theory, should make more money on those, but I don't. I just like to do it. But it was that huge fear that I thought, I do not want to make people concerned about going to the grocery store and buying product there and buying cheap product there. If you need to go to Walmart and you need to buy, or whatever grocery store you have, and you need to buy the cheapest meat that is there, I want you to go in with full consumer confidence and know that it is safe. It doesn't have anything in it that's not supposed to be in there, and it's nutritious. It doesn't matter what labels it has on it. You do not need to pay 1.5 or 2.5 or 5 times as much for a product. Now, if you want to do that, by all means, absolutely, please do. But that's what kills me. And living in an area where a huge majority of the children that go to my boys' school are on free and reduced lunch, it makes me so angry to see mothers guilted into having to spend more money because they're scared of food that's in the grocery store. And they feel like if they pay more, or if they pay up for a label, that they've done something to ensure more safety. And it's just not true. So on our farm, and it happens every year while somebody come in the pumpkin patch and they'll be like, oh, this ground beef is just so much better. And 9 times out of 10, I try to have a conversation, and this is always what it ends up being. When you guys go to the grocery store, what percentage of beef do you guys buy? Do you know, you buy what? 90-10, right? Yes, me too. If I'm going to go to the grocery store, my mother-in-law is a registered dietitian, so I buy 90-10. Sorry, beef producers, they're cringing at me. But I buy that lean beef because it's got less fat on it. Well, when you come to me and we have it all processed, we just got yesterday, I just picked up 518 pounds of ground beef to put in the deep freeze. That is 80-20. So when you take it home, you're like, oh, it's got so much more flavor. Yeah, because you're eating more fat. I'm like, it has nothing to do. If you go to the store and you buy 80-20, it will be the same, I promise you. So I'm like 9 times out of 10, that's what it is. And then I think that other 1 time out of 10, it's just in our minds, right? That we think when we go to the farmer's market and we like the experience that comes with that. And I'll capitalize on that. I'm not above saying, hey, come to the farm. We love to have you. I want to sell you beef for the experience. But that's really what people are tasting, because the product that's sold in the store is the same when it comes to beef. Now, vegetables, there's some freshness issues, right? We can't take that garden fresh tomato that just, you pick it out of the garden and it's going to fall. Like, we can't ship that. And so that's not feasible. Yeah. But it's not a safety or a nutrition issue. But that's one thing that we wanted to be so cognizant of when we started to sell direct to consumer. I did not want to go into the community and create fear for moms or anybody going into the grocery store to buy product there.
Same here. Katie asked me earlier about our beef, and I said, we sell beef off the farm, right? I don't put any of those labels on it because I feel like if I do, it's just pointing the finger at someone else, and my own beef included.
Yeah.
So agriculture would like to end mom guilt in the food sector. That should be a new campaign. Really, stop the mom guilt.
Yeah, and I would just add on with antibiotics, right? When you go and look at meat and you see antibiotic-free meat, and there's a reason why with my cattle operation, I give them antibiotics. If you think about, I'm not a mother, I don't have kids, but if you guys do have children, if they're sick, you're not gonna be like, well, I hope you get over it in 2 weeks. Like, lay low for a while. You're gonna help them get over it. You're gonna give them medicine. You want to help them become healthy again. Just like my cattle. Like Ashley talked about pink eye earlier. I have that in my herd, so I have the ones that have pink eye. I'll watch it for a while. If it gets bad, I'll bring them up. I'll give them one vaccination for pink eye and then take care of it. I'm not, pumping vaccines into every single animal if they don't need it. Herd health is really important to me because if I have healthy cows, then you guys have healthy meat. And that's crucial.
And there are withdrawal periods on all of those products that we're all very cognizant of. So same thing, we've had to treat a couple, they are a long time from the production chain, but we ensure that there's never antibiotics in meat. So it's frustrating to see antibiotic free or whatever it may be.
So for example, like I had this conversation with the consumer not too long ago. And so I have a small herd, 30 cows. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll often see me like hand feeding them. They're just all really tame. And one of them had a sore foot. And I told the consumer, she was like, well, with antibiotics, I don't want that to be in my system. And we talked about the withdrawal period and how it's healthy for cattle. But, one of my cows, she's one of my favorites, actually. She had a sore foot. I'm not going to let her just limp around the pasture in pain and agony, right? I got her in the chute. I had the vet come out. We took care of it. And she's running around now happy and healthy. So it's just important to have that good animal husbandry and be good animal producers. It's good for animal welfare.
I'm just going to ask, I grew up in a rural community, and a lot of the stuff you guys are talking about with agronomy and quality control and such, frankly, didn't exist. Nobody on the farms I grew up on was calling an agronomist. And so I'm just curious kind of how that plays out as far as the quality of meat that does make its way to the consumer, because again, just being from an area where I can't imagine these farmers reaching out to the resources they had. They maybe there's just not nearly that of a deliberate, intentional way of managing their herds and such. And I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on that, because this is a very responsible panel, but I haven't witnessed that being consistent across the state.
And would you say that's true still or when you grew up? So my first blush at the question, which was when I grew up on a farm, I did not see the level of consultation and experts brought in and management that we've talked about today, is that just like technology off the farm, we have evolved dramatically, right? Everything has changed dramatically. So I mentioned earlier, there are examples in Missouri of individuals who are doing it like Grandpa did, very much so. But products and technology change, even rules and regulations have changed, so that if we want to feed an antibiotic, for instance, if we have enough pink eye out here, it's going to be far more efficient to treat the whole group because it's viral or bacterial. It's going to be going through the whole group than to individually treat each one. In order to do that, we have to get a directive from our vet that is written specifically for those animals and that. And so I think that technology has been driven. A lot of technological change has been driven in, let's say, 25 or 30 years. We're not in the ag economy that we were 2 decades ago even, or maybe even 15 years ago.
Even 5 years ago. Yeah. So I'm younger in my career and I started with MFA 5 years ago. And the amount that I have seen change in the last 5 years with products available, technology available, different traits available, it's amazing. So I think just with the complexity that into the agronomy side of it, the complexity that our farmers have with some of their products, they are seeking more counsel about what do I use here and why would I use this product over this.
I will add that by no means are we're like any other industry, right? There's bad apples, there's people, and I would argue we probably have very few intentionally bad apples, but there's people who just grew up, they do things the way that they were always done, they don't know any different. There are checks and balances in the system, especially when it comes to food product. You can walk into a grocery store with full confidence in this country and know that the product that you're buying is not have any residual antibiotic in it. If there's nothing in there that's not supposed to be in there, the animal was well taken care of. So there's checks and balances all along the way when those animals leave. In most of those types of operations here, the animal is going to leave and go get fed somewhere else. Especially, I know we have a great fear and economic conversations that rightfully should happen about large, very, very extreme large operations. But one thing you can be sure about is that those farmers, those farm families who have grown operations that are very large have got phenomenal record-keeping systems. They know what the regulations are, and they are meeting those regulations. And so the checks and balances that are in the system, even though we'll have some producers that are further along the line in terms of progression than others, you can go to a store with full confidence and know that the product is safe.
And I would say I can't think of anyone that I know in these counties that I wouldn't have invited to join me up here to tell their story. But I wouldn't have minded for any of those stories. And I think anybody who's still in agriculture today, pressures are high, is driven by profitability motives to continue innovation. It's just simply, unless you have 15 cows out back and you're doing it for fun or for tax purposes or to utilize your land, there's just not room to not adapt latest technology.
I'd also just compliment that. I'm too also from a farm. I studied agronomy in Canada, so really great to be a part of this and learn a little bit more about where I live now. But with farming, over the last 25 years, it's neat to see the generations come up. So I started out with my dad owning the farm. Brother has now bought it, and it has revolutionized the change on the farm based on when my dad had it until now. Costs have gone up. Productivity is also gone up, thank goodness. But it's a livelihood. So we don't do this for fun, unless you're a hobby farmer. But the rest of it's a true livelihood. So they're very careful about the products that they apply and needing to only apply them when it's needed.
I would say my favorite Kate Lambert quote that has stuck with me, yes, for years now, is when she stood up to accept the first Leopold Award. She said the amazing, outstanding, incredible, I don't know what word you used, thing is that there are thousands more farm families like us out there. I'm just a representative of the thousands of farm families. Now, they may be right on the edge of the best of the best, but there are thousands of farm families who could represent just as well, right? The incredible thing is, I'm just one of many. And I absolutely cherish that quote, right? When we're a fairly solid representative sample of everybody striving to do their best or has been driven by change or generation out of this business.
That transitions to the plant science agronomy world too, right? When they talk about with animals and being able to purchase the medicine for their cattle, on the agronomy side, there's certain herbicides that you have to go through specific training to have, that you have to go through to be able to purchase and apply these herbicides. It's intense training, it's really important training, and it goes both ways for sure.
And so, for instance, I alluded that we have to replant corn, which is the story of North Missouri this year.
The story of all of Missouri this year.
But whatever my husband had to spray, you probably know what it was. Whatever he had to spray to kill the corn, he had to take another course before and so he has his license to be able to spray. That's a cost-saving thing for us, right? Instead of contracting that out, he does the requirements to have the licensing every year. He's the only one on the farm who will be in charge of measuring and doing all that stuff because he carries the license, so he's responsible in all of those areas. But for that particular chemical, he had to go through, I think like a full day on an online thing. And it's one of those deals like you've got to have your camera on and you have to engage in certain pieces of it. It's not just like click it on and walk out to the shop and go do something different.
And it's normally administered by the extension center. So it's a non-biased, it's not like you're buying these chemicals, just click, 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 here you go. I mean, it's the extension center that has no dog in the fight, right? It's an unbiased agency.
Yeah. I can't have this conversation without saying that prior generations, when I think of my husband's grandpa, who still comes to the farm about 3 or 4 days a week. Now, COVID has changed that, so he needs to be a little bit careful, but there is so much that man knows. He might not know the science or the technology behind it, but there is so much that generation knew. For instance, now today we talk about cover crop and we're like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. We can put cover crop down and it helps with soil health and it helps us build organic matter and it makes all this nutrient available and we have all these sciencey words that we can use. And he's like, well, yeah, we did that back when I first started farming. I mean, it worked. We don't really know why we put clover out when we were growing crash crop, but it worked. And then, for a generation, they went away from those types of practices and now you see a lot of that coming back. And so that, those older generations, they have so much knowledge that, like any other industry, we have got to figure out how to transfer that knowledge because we're getting ready to see, and I'm sure that in your professional world, you're looking at the same thing. How do we take all these people that are going to be exiting our industry and capture that knowledge? Because we need to do that as well. There was just a lot stored up that those guys and gals lived through and learned, even if they don't have the sciencey words.
Life knowledge.
Yeah.
Just like
What Ashley said, eloquently, communicating it.
Yeah, even if they don't have the right words for it, things that they just knew and they did that we try to capitalize on, because he is, by all means, one of the most intelligent men I've ever been around, and no formal education in growing anything.
I was downcast at a picnic last year. Cattle prices, we just sold red cattle sometimes don't bring as much as black cattle. I think I was lamenting that because there are premiums in the marketplace. Certified Angus beef, that you all know, is a black-hided cattle. That's pretty much the criteria for certified Angus beef. It has to be black-hided. And so those premiums are trickling down to the sale barn. And so I was lamenting this at a picnic with neighbors, and an 82-year-old who came in and bought land cheap and is running a big operation and has been for 50 years now said, it just kind of guffawed at me, right? Like, oh, don't worry about it. I've sold cattle a lot cheaper. It was a little bit, now is he in a different financial situation than me? Absolutely, because he has paid for land and has for 50 years anyway, and runs a great operation. But it did maybe sober my youthful peaks and valleys in that, just knowing that he'd lived through that, he'd seen that, and it was going to be, I'm sure he did sell them for a lot cheaper, even today's value. And so it did help that generational wealth. The average age of a farmer is 58 in this country. And so there's a lot of land to be transitioned and a lot of knowledge to be transitioned. So we just wanted to gather back together and answer any questions we missed and hit on other few good topics that we've either heard over lunch or we thought might be lingering. So other questions before we roll into a couple more topics? Okay. So I don't know if you guys have one or two more on your list that you want to hit. You have a top one you want to hit, Kaitlin?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about rural economic development and how ethanol plants, we're going to tour Poet tomorrow, how important those are to rural communities. So a lot of the communities that like our communities, there's not a lot of job opportunity, right? And we see a lot of students graduate high school and they move off because they move to the city where they can find a good paying job. And it's so crucial for us to have, opportunities to keep those families and those young people in our communities, to keep the churches alive, the banks alive, the libraries, the restaurants, all of that. And so like with an ethanol plant, and even so much like Smithfield up there in Milan, that provides a lot of job opportunity for people to stay in their hometowns and make a good salary and get benefits also, contribute to their 401k, get health, dental, vision insurance, where there's not always that opportunity in rural Missouri. So that's something that's tomorrow, like when we go to the ethanol plant, you guys will see it's pretty important for our livelihood.
But they're one of 6 ethanol plants throughout the state, all of which were majority farmer owned. We had over 2,000 farmers that pooled together their money to be able to move themselves up the value chain. And that is a tremendous success story of Missouri agriculture. So they consume about 1/3 of the corn crop in the state goes to our ethanol plants, 1/3 goes to exports out of the state and often out of the country, and 1/3 goes to livestock here within the country and the state. There are byproducts that come out of the backside of that, which you'll learn about tomorrow, that also benefit farms like.
Yep, and so like my family, I mentioned that they have a dairy farm, and so when the corn prices go up, my family's looking at where could we sell it? Could we sell it to a retail location? Could we take it into the city? Could we take it to an ethanol plant? Who's paying the most for corn right now? And if they take their corn up to the ethanol plant, they'll haul back DDGs, which is dried distillers grains, and it's a byproduct from that corn, and they feed the cattle with that in return. So it's a win-win relationship, and it's good for rural economic development, it's good for the environment, and it's value added onto our corn product.
We talked about some things that might stay from COVID, and if we can get our game together with internet, there's a lot of hope that that we have seen in our community, people that have been able to come back to the community or are moving away from some of those population centers because of more flexible work arrangements. And that is something that is super exciting for me. And even people that live in our community that maybe they felt like they had limited employment opportunity with maybe the one employer in town. And now all of a sudden it's like, hey, this opens me up. I might be able to apply all over the country to jobs that I'm qualified for. And that's no different than what you guys are seeing in your communities, but it's super exciting for us where we have more limited resources in those areas.
Yeah, rural broadband has been such an important issue for rural Missouri. Even when COVID shut down schools, I mean, there were so many children in my community, and I'm not a mom, I don't have kids, but from my friends and from what I hear about my community, their children didn't have access to good Wi-Fi, right? And that hinders their learning ability. So that's important too.
Yep. One last topic I wanted to hit on was another hat I wear. I have so many hats, I have to have a large rack for them. I am the chairwoman of the Missouri Clean Water Commission, which oversees regulatory, permitting, and rulemaking authority for clean water in the state of Missouri. So I serve in an ag industry and mining seat on that commission. And one of the things that we oversee a lot of everything from the CertainTeed shingle factory along I-70 to wastewater treatment facilities, to what upgrades Metropolitan Sewer District is going to do in St. Louis, to a lot of issues about permitting of animal agriculture. And the reason that we permit animal agriculture is that, one, no entity is allowed to come into the state and degrade the state's water quality. Management has to happen so that that doesn't occur. So often the most controversial issues are confined animal feeding operations that go in, because when those hog barns that are up in Sullivan and Putnam counties, they are essentially built on a big basement, and it catches all the waste, and then the waste is taken out and knifed into or injected into farm fields like those that surround my farm. And that can be a controversial issue, mostly because pigs stink, right? Pigs have a smell, and often a lot of other issues get pulled in trying to stop a not in my backyard scenario. And so not much different than the power industry or windmills, which is a hot topic in Northeast Missouri that you'll get to see. That becomes an issue that can pit neighbor against neighbor. And so I think the important thing to me is that sometimes people try to portray what's underneath those hogs as a toxic waste. And those of us in agriculture just have a fundamentally different understanding that that's a nutrient. That's something that makes crops grow. And so we see it as an asset that has to be managed and has to be applied correctly and has to be set back from waterways, but that's an asset that makes hay and crops grow.
And it's a natural, if I may, it's a natural fertilizer too, therefore you're even saving on an input cost instead of buying a synthetic fertilizer for that.
And I would say if there was a barn close enough, I would jump all over the opportunity, because our fertilizers, we're in a global marketplace. We don't have a high input farm here because it's a lot of grass, but pelletized nitrogen or phosphorus can come from Ukraine, from the Black Sea region, right? And so the fossil fuel impact of that is more than we would like. Locally using grains and feeding animals, and then using that ammonium or that ammonia and that nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, everything that's contained therein is a win-win for those of us in ag. And so that is a hot topic that often is in the news, and I'd be happy to take any questions, but just wanted to really hit on that. And at the same time, the second part I wanted to hit was that corporate farm and factory farm are very labels that I get stuck on agriculture a lot. And so just to provide some truth and clarity to that, so 97% of the 2.1 million farms in this country are family owned, and that may be an LLC or a corporation that also includes family. And of those 97% of family farms, they're producing 85% of the country's ag production value. So there's some big farms, right? There's 3% that are some big farms that are producing a lot. But most of everything in this country comes from those family farms. And so I just wanted to point that out, because that's often, we often feel in agriculture that there is an effort by extremists or activists to point out that they're not factory farms producing, or they're not family farms producing your food today, it's a factory. And you can see by everything around me, that's simply not the reality out here. So, any questions?
I have a question. I'm Jennifer from Columbia, Missouri. Follow the ruler, she. Okay. My daughter is 20, and we don't have a farming background, but she's very interested in getting into animal husbandry and working with cattle and horses. What advice would you give to somebody who doesn't have the background but kind of wants to break in?
So you said she's 20. Is she at the university? Okay, so I would always recommend getting him. Is she at Mizzou? Okay, there's different clubs within the College of Agriculture. Is she studying agriculture?
She's studying animal science.
Animal science, perfect. So, there's a lot of different organizations within the animal science department that, like the Beef Club, the Horse Club, Swine Club, that gives that hands-on experience. So I would just recommend that.
Farm Bureau. And then my advice would be so I had to work my way through college. I worked my way through college, and I was an animal science major. I had decided that on the playground in second grade, and that's what I did. And so, and the girl that I made that decision with, she decided she was going to go to Mizzou and be a doctor. She went to Mizzou to be a nurse. So we had a binding commitment there in the back of the playground in second grade. I worked for the agronomy farm for Bradford, so I got some exposure in plant science. So one summer I counted weeds for a weed scientist. Otherwise, I would have no background in that. So that gave me then, eventually I ended up at the Corn Growers Association. I had a little bit of some common ground to build on. I worked there, I worked for the farms and centers, I worked at the beef farm, I worked at the rec center. I worked a little bit of everywhere, but those jobs and every opportunity that I took to work in the summer, not only just internships with our association, but there are, I should have connected the dots that Alex is an intern through the Ag Experience internship program with MFA Incorporated. They take interns and put them in agronomy, crop scouting, technology, and precision agriculture. And so those jobs are where really hands-on learning is going to advance her knowledge.
Can I add one thing to that? You all remember middle school? And right, okay. Yeah, exactly. And I'm not dogging on us, but agriculture can be very much like a middle school lunchroom. We have got this group, and we kind of side-eye you, like, you're either in the group or you're not. And it can be incredibly intimidating, not being born and raised in the industry, not knowing the lingo. And I tell people all the time, I got a 10-year-old son. My 10-year-old knows more about production agriculture than the average American ever will. So when I came into the industry, not only, number one, it's male-dominated, and so you're going to be a woman in there, and you're going to be a little bit nervous about that. We all know what that feels like. Number two, you don't know the right words to use, you don't know the right language to use, you don't know things about timing of seasons and all sorts of stuff. And it can be extremely, extremely intimidating. And for most people, it takes years to get over the fact to just say, I don't know what you're talking about. But the quicker she will do that, the quicker she's like, hey, it's okay, I don't know what you're talking about. When I was a loan officer, one of the things that used to just scare me was having to go out and look at farmers' equipment. Because I knew what cows looked like, and I knew what horses looked like, and I could tell the difference in a sheep and a pig and a goat. But if I had to go look at equipment, I had to write down like what it was, and then the crazy thing is I had to know where the serial number was. And if you're if you talk to my father-in-law, he could tell you where the serial number should be located on a tractor that was built in 1952, depending on what brand it is, okay? So you go out there, and I'm like, okay, and I've got my phone, I'm like, this is a planter, maybe. All right, it's a John Deere planter. And where should and they're like, no, that's not a planter, that's a tedder. And I'm like, gosh, tedder. Okay, where should she's got to just get over that. And if she can do that, it's like, I would say it's no different than any other industry, but the reality is it is, because when you're sitting at the table with other 25-year-olds, you're 2 years into your career and they're 25 years into their career. And so there's that factor that you've got to just say, hey, I'm new here. I wasn't born on this. Can somebody explain to me what it is we're talking about? And the quicker she does that, the quicker she'll succeed.
Yeah, so, and I
Tell her it's not coming from me.
And I would just add, like when I got comfortable as an agronomist, as a female, fresh out of college, when I got comfortable saying, I don't know that answer, but I should know that, and I'm gonna figure it out, so give me 30 minutes, I'll call you back, or I will get back to you. And then following through, if that person gets angry, like, I can't believe she doesn't know that on the spot, that's on them. Letting that go and saying, like, I'm gonna find that out, it's gonna be a learning opportunity for myself. So then when I get asked that down the road, I'll know.
And then you build trust that way too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because we have so many different areas of expertise that we're needing in agriculture, from IT and broadband and tech, there's a lot of people coming into agriculture that aren't from agriculture, right? The scientists at Bayer probably don't, in large part, have ag backgrounds. They're heavy scientists, right? Like from all over the world. They're amazing. So I would say the same thing. She'll find common ground. She won't be excluded forever once. And
I should say, they're not intentionally excluding anybody. It just feels that way. When you're the new person walking up and saying, can I sit down at the table, it's a really scary industry to come into. As soon as you're like, hey, I didn't grow up in this, people are like, no problem. I've never met somebody that will not answer or explain. And farmers love to talk about their farm. So if you could just be like, I don't know what you're talking about, can you explain that? And then 6 days later, you'll get to leave. And you'll be well-versed in everything that's going on.
Sorry, we ran away with it.
Oh, no, that's great. I'm just a little curious about this internship where you found counting weeds as something that you're excited about that. That was a punishment back in my home on the farm.
Yes, I can see that. I can give you some pretty good weed identification out there, though, at the 2-node stage.
We can walk around.
Yes, it wouldn't be fun. I really did. I also had that summer cut short because I got to go study abroad in Europe for 6 weeks. So maybe 6 weeks later, it might have been in mid-July, I might not still be recalling it quite so fondly. But I learned so much from the master's students that I was working for in agronomy and weed science and plant science, because I'm a first-generation college student. Had I had someone advising me better that had walked down the road before, I wasn't ever planning on being a scientist. I'm not sure I would have gotten an animal science degree. I do have a lot of agronomy out here, as you can see, right? There's a lot of plant science that goes into this farm. I probably should have had a more diversified degree because I didn't ever plan to work in a lab or, so that is my positive experience
Can I add one more thing too for your daughter? I've hired a lot of different crop scouts right out of college, and some of them come to me and say, like, I studied plant science, I studied agronomy, but I didn't grow up on a farm. And sometimes those make the best people in the industry because they don't have this bias that they're built in with. So they don't, I don't pull up to a farmer and say, this is farmer Joe and Jill, you're gonna be working with them. And they're like, oh, they do no-till? Well, my family, we till everything, and that's the way my grandpa did it, and my family does it, and so why would they do this? They have that unbiased opinion. Yes, extremely.
Last thing I'd state is that the industry is pretty cool, and I would say that all of us that are in ag are still learning. Every day I go to work, I'll learn something new again. So it'll always be a level playing field.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like it's changed quite a bit.
Thank you guys for indulging us as we talked about our passion.
Thank you for joining the Stand for Ag podcast with Missouri Farmers Care. We're excited to bring you new stories each week. We as agriculturalists have a lot of stories to tell. Stories of resilience, grit, and stories of families that are united by their passion for agriculture. Each week, tune in for a new episode and join the conversation.